Okay, thank you. Thank you, Michael. First of all, let me say how pleased I am to see all of you here. About blew me away. I was on the panel that, let's see, not last year, but late, was it 2000, February 2006, something like that. And I think we had probably half the number of people at that panel that we have here. So this tells me a lot about interest in this technology, which I think speaks words all in by itself. As Jordan explained, I'm the editor, the publisher, the founder, and the chief bottle washer at evworld.com. It's one of these things that began as a lark back in 1997. I thought it would be fun to write about electric cars. Why? I have no idea. It's a long story. I do have an idea, but I don't want to bore you with it. And of course, I immediately assumed, because of the California mandates in the late 1990s, that there was going to be this huge market for electric cars, because California had passed this law that 2% of every car sold in the state was going to be an electric drive vehicle, a zero emission vehicle. They called them ZEVs. And that was to start to take effect in 1998, which is when just before I launched the publication. So I figured, man, immediate market. And by 2003 or something like that, that was to ramp up to 10% of all the cars sold in California were to be ZEVs. And I thought, boy, all I got to do is start this publication and advertisement will just come pouring into my doors. Yeah, well, as you probably realize, it's taken a lot longer than I expected, or than a lot of us in the industry expected. But I think we are finally now at the point of the threshold of this starting to make it happen, which of course is the point of discussion we have today. We've really got some top-notch people here. I should say that one of our panelists is not here. She developed a severe migraine, Carrie Jane King, who is going to represent NYPA and would talk about the utility perspective of this, because obviously it's one thing to talk about cars, it's one thing to talk about the batteries, it's one thing to talk about business models and business plans. It's another, of course, to talk about what impact does this have on the utility industry. And that was Carrie Jean's role was going to be, but unfortunately she wasn't able to attend. So we'll have to rely on our other panelists here to talk about that, and I'm sure they will provide us with some really good information. Let's see, other than that, is there anything? I think that pretty well does it. Let me just sort of quickly introduce. The format here is going to be is we'll give each one of the panelists an opportunity to talk about 5 minutes about who they are, what it is they do, and then we'll get into where I'm going to ask them a series of questions that I have put together. I had 20 questions. I thought that was a good round number, and Jordan scaled that back. He said 3 of them were inappropriate, so we'll see. we might get to them, we might not. We'll see how that goes. And then at about the last half hour, they're going to open it up to all of you to start asking panelists, your questions and things. So I think we'll have a great opportunity here. Okay, well, let's start off. First of all, I think why don't we do ladies first, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
Vicki Northrup is the operations manager at Think North America, and I'm sure she'll explain a little bit more about what that is. But Think is one of these wonderful little companies that was born in Norway, died in Norway, was resurrected in Norway, died in Norway, and is now resurrected again. It's one of those great ideas that just that just will not go away. And it's somewhat, if you will, a story of the history of the electric car condensed down into a very short time frame. Because if you may or may not be aware, electric cars have been around for longer than internal combustion cars. If you were in Philadelphia in 1909 or 1900, 1898, 1900, and you wanted to take a taxi to get here, you know what you'd be riding in? An electric taxi cab. So they were running around. They even had battery swapping back then, which is part of the model that we'll talk about Project R in Better Place. They even had battery swapping back then. And of course then Charles Kettering went along and invented the electric starter in 1912. They put it on a Cadillac, and the industry hasn't looked back since. Suddenly those cantankerous cranks went away, and gasoline was cheap and abundant, and they just found Spindle Top, and they just found all that oil in East Texas, and we were awash in oil, and so they had to do something with it. So they created the internal combustion engine, and the electric cars became a piece of history.